Some blame immigration, some blame speculation, and some blame regulation, not least from Brussels. Whatever comes close to the truth, we shall try and find out today on EU Insights. But one thing that everybody seems to agree on, that there is a deep and Europe-wide crisis in affordable housing. The European Union has woken up to it, and not only is there for the first time ever a European Commissioner in charge of housing, but also here in the European Parliament, a special committee on the housing crisis in the European Union created to tackle this problem, which has already proven to be political dynamite in several countries as a major factor in the wider cost of living crisis and risking not least a rise in populist politics. We have 4 guests today to discuss this, 3 lawmakers who all sit on that special committee and 1 expert representing private building societies in Germany. Gabriele Bischoff is a leading member of the centre-left SPD as vice chair of the group of Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, to which she was first elected in 2019. Having served in another institution here in Brussels before, the Economic and Social Committee, she has strong links to Germany's trade union movement and is, apart from the special committee on the housing crisis, also sitting on the committees Constitutional Affairs and Employment and Social Affairs. Welcome.
Thank you.
Regina Doherty is representing the Irish capital Dublin, well known for its dramatic shortage of affordable housing. As an MEP since the last elections for the Fine Gael party, part of the European People's Party group. She is a vice chair of that special committee, as well as of the subcommittee on tax matters. In her former life, she served in her country's government as social protection minister and as chief whip. Welcome.
Thank you.
Dirk Gotink is also in his first parliamentary term here as lawmaker, also a vice chair of the special committee on the housing crisis, and also represents a country known for being afflicted by it, the Netherlands. And his party, New Social Contract, is also part of the EPP. Apart from the special committee, he also sits on the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs. And he may be a rookie as an MEP, but he has been involved in European politics for almost 2 decades, including as a spokesperson for the EPP and as assistant to its president, Manfred Weber. Welcome. Last but not least, our expert, Dr. Christian König. He is the chief executive of the German Association of Private Building Societies, so he is well versed in housing crises, in particular from the point of view of supply and demand. And he might have some suggestions of how to solve them. Welcome.
Thank you.
Christian König, first question to you perhaps. The European Commission has presented its first ever European Affordable Housing Plan in December. Now, this plan is very much linked to Commissioner Jurgensen's other portfolio, energy, and is meant to help green buildings and improve energy efficiency. Is this a useful angle to approach for an affordable housing strategy?
It is certainly, yeah. But what we need to focus is also on certain legislation which made housing and housing finance more expensive for our citizens. There have been a lot of proposals or legislation here in the Parliament which make financing more expensive and also building more expensive. So I suggest we also should focus on that.
So are there 2 different sort of even competing interests here that in the European lawmaking? Can we make the important way forward, the important step forward, battling the housing crisis, if you think too much about energy efficiency?
I don't think so. So from my perspective, the reason I wanted to be on the Housing Committee was because we have a major problem with housing delivery in Ireland, and particularly in the area that you suggested, that our younger people who are looking for affordable housing are simply being marked out of the housing market at the moment because it has become totally unaffordable. And from an Irish perspective, the reason for that is around permitting and all of the environmental legislation and regulations that people have to go through in order to get planning permission, either for 1 house or 1,000 houses. And I don't believe by dumbing down the requirements, because the world hasn't changed and our obligations towards climate targets and obligations haven't changed, but we certainly could simplify it. And the second aspect from an Irish perspective that I think would be really impactful is the capital requirements of our banks. that stops them from being able to lend, not only for mortgages perspective, but to small builders who could build 40 houses in each of our towns, are so restrictive that nobody can actually get the money to build. And if only those two things were fixed, I think it would make a massive difference in Ireland. But what we have seen across all of our member states is that we have the same outcome, as in not enough houses that are affordable, but sometimes caused by different reasons in different areas. So.
But in general, I had a look at your comments when in plenary when the Commission's plan was presented, and you were very, very positive about it. So you think this is really, I mean, the Commissioner himself spoke about, in a recent interview, about a holistic approach that's needed. And of course, he also mentioned that traditionally housing policy is not at all in the remit of the European Union, but there's sort of certain certain situations that can be, especially with financing and with regulation, that where Europe can do its bit. Can you? Is the Commission proposal on the right path there to achieve that? Do you think?
Yeah. The Commission followed very closely the work we have done in the Housing Committee, and you can see it in the proposal. And I have to say, the situation is far more complex than just one aspect. And we have looked into the different problems, but also in different solutions in the member states. And I think the key thing and the key difference here is that we want to play our part that we can play to tackle the housing crisis and to help to give more room for mayors, for regional responsible to do more on housing. And we have some competences in the services part. For example, if you look at short-term rentals, we provide a lot of funding already in this MFF, in this term of household, but we can do better because it's quartered around a lot of different funds. And also we can mobilize more private capital, for example, through this platform of the European Investment Bank. We can do parts where we have competences, and other parts are in the competences alone of member states. And here we can give recommendations, or we can spread good examples, and that's what we are doing. But we want to really say that in the end, we did our part, everything that we could, to have more affordable and decent housing in Europe. And I'm sure we will debate it later, that the Commission put the finger in all the areas that we discussed in the Housing Committee, and that we also debated there and looked at good examples and solutions.
Yeah. And coming from a sort of a country in the front line, maybe, of that crisis, is particularly bad in the Netherlands, as I understand. How optimistic are you that Europe can do its bit to fix the problem?
Well, you know, there's no one-size-fits-all for solutions in our member states, because some places like the Netherlands or Ireland have very much issues with regulatory questions that have to do with a very high density of a lot of European laws. Other places have access to capital problems. Gabi mentioned it already, the issue that also via the regional funding now, but also the European Investment Bank, they give opportunities to tap into investments. In the Netherlands, we don't need money. We need space. We need space, and we need regulatory to tone down the regulatory pressure, because housing is not a competence of the European Union, but everything that is around a house and in a house is regulated by the European Union. So you can say that it might not be a competence, but in fact, what we do here affects very strongly the ability of governments and of regional authorities to provide, and for builders, private builders, to provide affordable housing. So that's why for the EPP also we've pushed very much also on a simplification package. We will get it at the beginning of next year, and this is not an attack on any existing standards. But if you look at the amount of pages of legislation where builders and where authorities are expected to follow, then you'd be very shocked by the amount. And in that sense, there's a lot to win also in Europe by looking at this problem.
We had positive projects like this. I had the opportunity some weeks ago to talk to the Senator for Housing in Hamburg, and they did a coordinated project for a longer period, all responsible on buildings, being the architects, being the providers of housing, state authorities. They did sit together and look, it's called the Hamburg model, look at all the regulation. And their aim was together to identify useful areas where, for example, you have certain standards. We have a lot of DIN norms that are very expensive, for example. And in the end, the square meter, they reduced the cost tremendously. For example, some regulation that in Germany is a very rule-applying country, the Netherlands too, that you say a corridor has to be, if it gets minus 15 degrees, has to be heated at least until a certain amount. And this did lead to that they did build in a lot of floor heatings. But it gets maybe 2-3 days a year minus 15 and not others. This is things that you can simplify immediately. And I think we looked at some good projects like this where you can have really achievements, or that you have certain DIN norms where you have to look on cost and sort of what are they essential or not, and there is room for maneuver. But I think the Commission already delivered, and I think a lot of people haven't realized it with the reform of the state aid rules. I mean, really, I've never seen something so fast happening. We discussed it. Before we even vote on our final report in the plenary, it is there, and it will really help mayors and regions to support more affordable housing, to do it simpler, faster, and not focus only on social housing. And it will both be at the same time support social housing, continue with this, because we have a huge lack of social housing, but at the same time affordable housing. Regina and I, we have been at Eurofound last week, and we heard again and looked in the different empirical studies that we have on problems of the middle class, especially also the lower middle class, in finding affordable housing. Be it like Bausparkassen in my German country, it's a tradition
Building
that you
societies,
help building societies, that you help people that they can finance their own homes, or be it for people that provide flats to rent.
So do you think this reform of the state aid rules will do the trick for you to revive?
It is one element, yes, and I'm happy that you mention it. But I would like to mention also other regulation which are coming from this house. So we had the construction product regulation, where you have the duty to have documentation on the recycling of building material, for example. It creates a burden. I know why it is done. Or we have the CSDD, we have the EPBD, we had the CR, the Capital Requirements Directive you mentioned, where we have capital buffers for housing credits allowed by national supervisors, which make housing finance more expensive. We have the limitation of the output floor limited, which makes it also more expensive. So we have many rules coming from this house, from Brussels, which makes housing finance and building more expensive. And I was really wondering, when I saw the report by the Commission, there is the word simplification in it, but there are no concrete proposals to scrutinize the existing legislation from the European Union to make it more cheaper and more efficient. And I really strongly suggest not only to compare existing systems, but also take account into existing legislation and make it maybe more affordable, more simpler, more easier. Like you said, the DIN norms in German are German norms. When I came here today, I had to file for A1 certification in order to cross border to work today here in Brussels. So this is another obstacle for going cross border. So there are so many.
We are talking to the rapporteur on the coordination of social security, and it has a certain purpose.
Yeah, I know.
But we have a simplification here online without threatening the security and social protection, by proving that an employer pays social security contribution for the building workers. It's very essential in the construction sector.
But for this gentleman,
it
I
should
think
be
it's
abolished.
totally redundant.
Yeah, but we have this in the pipeline, and the council refused twice to agree to the provisional agreement, where we did an exemption for you, and you wouldn't
Especially.
need to do it. So, you said we do it in this house. I mean, it's the Commission who presents the proposals, and we negotiate with the council. And also, the Parliament has its role as co-legislators. And at the same time, it sounds very easy what you say, but it will be very complicated. And it's addressed in the housing plan, because we have to look, as Regina said, we don't want to lower energy efficiency. I mean, this will drive us into more problems. We don't want to lower, for example, certain protection in areas where you have flooding, where you have avalanches, and I don't know. So it will be a serious screening. But I think, for example, I learned in the Housing Committee that when we did the taxonomy, the lobbyists of certain construction areas were so effective that this influenced this legislation. So there is a lot of interest behind, and the Commission will come up with proposals, and we will discuss it seriously and look what can be simplified without undermining with this that people in the future can also pay their energy bills.
So I might be able to give you some confidence and maybe some hope. So when the committee was established, there was a number of members of the committee who spoke to Commissioner Jurgensen in the opening weeks of our committee meetings to say there are already things that we know you could do, and do them now. Don't be waiting, for us to talk to other, representative bodies for 12 months. Do them now. And his reaction at the time was no. He used to be an MEP. He knows exactly what would happen if he didn't allow us to do our work. And whilst actually that was quite frustrating, given that we kind of thought we knew some of the things that could have been done, he did listen and saw the value of our work in a relatively short space of time, and came to us off the back of the President of the Commission instructions that himself and other commissioners came to us in December and said, yes, we hear you loud and clear. These are the things we're going to do now. And one of the things is a simplification package. And it isn't to dumb down any of the reporting requirements that anybody has, either for one-off houses or for 1,000 houses. It's to try and just make it a little bit easier so as to reduce the cumbersome burden of having to do numbers of regulatory requirement reportings to different institutions that, as Dirk said, might go to thousands and thousands of pages. So first of all, we should be looking at digital and turning that whole business into digital so that the human error nuance can't be decided by a court of law in 2 years' time or 5 years' time as it takes in Ireland. But second of all, why do we need to report the same thing to 5 different agencies, 5 different times? We need to simplify. The house permitting package is an absolute definite, and I really do believe that the simplification omnibus will be with us as soon as is physically possible. But again, we can look at corporate capital requirements for our banks, and I think you can see that there's a clamour now for a financial omnibus bill to simplify the financial services sector. And it's not in isolation, and it's not to make anybody richer, but it's to realise that our capital requirements are stopping our small to medium-sized builders being able to get their hands on the money they need to build the 40 houses in every single town and village right across the European Union. And once we do these small things, I think it will have a big impact. And then there are other states that do require money. Dirk and the Netherlands and Ireland are in the lucky position of, for the first time in my lifetime, not needing money because it's bureaucracy that's causing the problem here. But there are other countries that we have visited over the last 12 months who desperately need to be able to use cohesion funds for maintenance of their social housing stock. There's countries that have huge what's the word I'm looking for, where people stay in a house and they shouldn't be allowed in the house and they board up the window. Squatting, right, sorry. We're very lucky that in Ireland we don't have that, but there's some of my colleagues have enormous squatting problems. So there's different problems that are causing the fundamental shared problem that our young people are starting their shared life later, which has an impact on all of the social cohesion and social issues of the future that we know about, the birth rates, the pension requirements that we're going to have, all because they can't afford a house now until they're in their mid-30s, where people in my generation bought in their mid-20s. That's going to have a fundamental impact. And I think we know that, which is why you've seen us work at a speed that I don't think the European Parliament has ever really worked at before, because this issue is so important to us. I hope.
No, and I think the Commissioner listened to him very, very hard to what he said, because in a recent interview he said exactly the same thing, especially about young people. And that, of course, is true, and that's a fact. And you can see this then translated into politics that
Action.
we might not want to see, might not want to experience, in young people turning to positions who politicians offering simple answers that really aren't.
But the fact of the matter is that a lot of member states have failed to deliver on the basic needs of a very big part of future generations. In the Netherlands, you need 90,000 euros in cash to have access at all to the buying market. Most students come out of their university with a debt, not with 90,000 euros in cash on their bank account.
How would they get it?
So the only way you have access to the buying market is via parents, and parents underwriting mortgages.
The bank of mum and dad.
Of their at the bank of mum and dad, and that is a fundamental, of course, you would call it an injustice, I believe, and I don't think we should be surprised that people will look for alternative solutions if the mainstream parties continue to fail to deliver the outcomes that people are simply asking for. And they're not asking for too much, I believe. So I would not be afraid, even if we talk about standard, I would not be afraid also to do a bit less on standards. Because I think every law that went through this House never got a bit less. Every legislative proposal got a top-up from the European Parliament. And it didn't, and very often it didn't make them easier to apply. We did not do impact assessments on the proposals that we did. And I think it is a lesson, because now we are correcting a lot of the issues that we amended into the legislation in the past, and now we are confronted with the consequences.
Yeah, but
and
now we don't do impact assessments anymore, but we did in the past.
No, but I'm talking about the role of the Parliament.
Because
the Parliament we can write anything we want into the law, and then because it is nice in a headline, but in the end, if it doesn't build houses, then what are we doing to ourselves?
Yeah, but this sounds simple. I mean, we have 20% of all buildings in Europe uninhabited. At the same time, where young people are running around to look for affordable housing, 20%. Yeah.
A lot of them are in places where people don't want to live.
No. For example, in Lisbon, you have a very high rate.
Yes.
In my city, for example, because a lot of people used it as a form of investment. They are almost never there. Yeah. But this causes problem. It also drives prices, and there we have to look. Therefore, as you said, there is not one simple solution. We have to look at the standards, and we will do it. We have to look at the empty housing. For example, I met the German Association of Architects. And they said, for example, if you would have a European register of empty spaces in cities, you would at least know how much capacity you have. We don't even have that on national level, not even in the cities. We really have to see, we have a lot of buildings which we can reuse. It would be faster. This is why it's good that the European Investment Platform will also finance and support more reuse of buildings. Because also new buildings, in this crisis we have, it often takes too much time anyway, even if you have shorter procedures. So to look, where do we have empty spaces, where can we reuse or upscale, because we have to deliver for the young people fast. I mean, it's really a risk of competitiveness. I'm coming from Berlin. In my city, when I meet the Chamber of Commerce, the first thing they address is housing. They say, I have qualified personnel coming from somewhere, but then they don't come because they cannot find housing. And this needs to address fast. And this is why we have to look in all the areas and also focus on the ones where we can have the biggest impact.
Could I say two things?
Yes.
Number one, sometimes I think when we talk about changing the standards, people automatically assume that we're going to lower the standards. And something that we did recently in Ireland was that in our rules around apartment building, in the living space of the apartments, it had to have a dual aspect. It had to have a window at the front of the room and the back of the room, which really made it quite expensive. And we changed that a number of months ago to only having the window on one side of the house. So you now can build apartment blocks with an apartment this side and this side. And it reduced the cost of building an apartment by 40 grand. Now, I don't necessarily think it has reduced the standard, because I don't know any house that has a room with a window on one side, on the other side, even in a normal house. So I don't think sometimes we frame the reduction of standards as in a positive thing as opposed to just automatically thinking it's a negative thing. But where I do agree with you is that we concentrated a lot, obviously, on new builds, on trying to get money to build new things in a simpler and faster way. And I think that's really the right thing to do. But we also need to reflect, in Ireland, we have 475,000 homes with only one person living in them. And they have more than one bedroom. So have we had a look at an initiative where we could actually encourage people to house share, or whether we could encourage people to rent out? Now, I know not everybody wants to, but we haven't actually even looked at if there's a possible pool of maybe 40,000, even if we only got 10% of them, 40,000 houses there that we could actually put more people in. Or maybe having an ingenious idea of building houses that are right-sized for people who want to live in their community with all the amenities that they need, which would free up the 475. So we need to think about all the aspects of the problems that we have in all of our member states, and not just look at the easy ones to fix, because it's in a year's time or 3 years' time, when we've done the low-hanging fruit, that we will be still sitting here saying, we need to address this, we didn't do that yet, we need to keep the pressure on this. And I think that's where the commitment is from the politicians that I've worked with in the last 12 months, 18 months on this issue, because every one of us is dedicated to the positive outcome and fixing the problem in all of our member states. So.
Can I raise one point? The inconsistency of EU legislation. The taxonomy regulation doesn't fit with the EPPD, for example. So the taxonomy regulation focuses on the top in class, and the EPPD focus on the lowest. So there are some mismatches. The other thing is...
And that was the one that the building... I'm lacking the word of the dam industry.
Isolation.
Isolation, and with amendments last minute, so we as legislators can be as good as possible. If you have these last minute amendments and
get it in quick.
You have a good lobbying, that's the thing about doing good legislation. And I think indeed inconsistencies have to be and should be addressed, and to see where solutions are. But I think it will not give immediate or fast solutions. So we have to have fast ones immediately, where we can have a big impact. We have to look at the medium, what we can achieve, and maybe that's in the medium. And also in some long-term developments.
Now we have the green asset ratio obligation for banks to calculate how much of your balance sheet is invested into green business. But on the other hand, we don't have a definition for retail green credits yet. So this doesn't fit. And one thing I would like to mention at the end is that in the report by the European Commission, I miss clearly a chapter on home ownership. Home ownership, Wohneigentum. Home ownership, you mentioned it, young people are desperately looking for a place to be, to stay, to build up families for the society. And home ownership is a crucial part for wealth, for social security in the future. And we need to increase, especially in our country, the home ownership rate. And I really hope that the European Union would also focus on that and raise the points to certain countries who introduce high taxes on buying property, stamp duties and taxes when you buy some property, which are really high. And there should be some exemptions for first-time buyers. It is not in the scope of the EU, I know that, but you can make comparison of good practice in member states and show member states what can be done in Belgium, for example, what can be done in other countries, and compare, and we would have competition in this sense. But home ownership is crucial for especially the younger generation you mentioned.
Well, look at the success. Look at the success of the past generations. A lot of it was built simply on a home. And from there, a bank will also invest in other endeavors, in other ideas of starting a business or having another future perspective. So I think there's no silver bullet from Europe, and we need to piece it all together. Regulation is clearly a part of it, financing is a part of it. And I believe that we have...
Speculation is also part in it.
And better than market. We haven't talked about short-term rentals.
And also fixing the internal market for building construction and for labor, the A1, what you just talked about. I mean, it's something that there are many fixes.
Yeah, but
very complex.
Don't say that the A1 is a problem to building. Then I'm jumping out of the window. You know how long it takes to do that? And do you want to be jumped against here in our market by people that work on our building sites that have no social security if they have accidents. We have
No.
high death rates.
No, we don't.
We want
No,
the
of course nobody wants
protection
that.
of the
But at the moment,
in the construction. He should not file one in the future,
Thank
but
you.
in the construction.
But there are many people working from the Dutch side of the border that work in Germany.
Yeah.
And they need forms to go into Germany and they need forms to get out of Germany. And for both sides, if they go and install a washing machine, and when they take the old washing machine back to the Netherlands, they're exporting waste. So you need all kinds of different bureaucratic steps, and this goes for housing, it goes for all parts of our economy. And we have to be a lot stricter about what we accept in these areas.
Well,
Work in progress.
Work in progress. And that's a good last sentence here. It's all we have time for. Of course, it's work in progress. Your report has just been voted on with a very comfortable majority, and it'll go into plenary soon.
But
I guess
it's not a given, I would think. If I look at the voting in the committee, I think we have to convince a lot of people so that we get a big majority. Because there are also people that are not happy with the report. And I say it can be always better, but we work on the basis of compromises here.
Yeah.
And I think that going a big step in the right direction is much better than having the magic solution in 3 years.
Absolutely.
And this is the pressure we are having. So I really hope that we will have a broad support and can do the next steps.
fantastic. Thank you very much to my guests, Gabriele Bischoff, Dirk Gotink, Regina Doherty, and Christian König. And thank you for watching, and see you next time.